am a married woman. I'm not a single woman. And my husband is the most handsome of all. Let's just say it. So, but even me as a consecrated woman, I am also called to live this maternity, right, in a very spiritual way. But I do consider, like, I do have my children, you know, scattered in the world, in all the places. Wherever I go, I live like, of course, I am in contact with many people, but there's few relationships that I start building that really I consider like they are my children. You know, in Colombia, there's this 29-year-old guy that I was his spiritual director since I was there like 12 years ago. And I'm still in contact with him, and right now he has been battling with a terrible cancer, a very unusual cancer that grows surrounding all the organs of these parts. So it's a very unique cancer. And for me, it's so beautiful, like to be accompanying him and just like taking care of his spiritual nourishment, you know, and I do feel it like he's my kid, you know. Yeah, so anyway, we all have this call to live our maternity, and that is something very, very beautiful. So how can these four elements be enriched with the transformative power of our gaze? And that can be a question that you bring with you, right, to reflect on. How can my gaze empower my receptivity? And how can my loving gaze also awaken my sensitivity? Right? And make it flourish and put it at the service of beauty, at the service of God, at the service of all the relationships that keep my heart full of love and gratitude and all these beautiful emotions. How can my gaze also foster that generosity that I am called to live, right? And how can my gaze empower that beautiful maternity that we all have, right? How can it be at the service of my maternity? So anyway, here for me, I think I've told you, right? Like I've had a hard time translating the terms, and even when I wrote the book of The Power of the Gaze, even in Spanish, because I wrote it in Spanish, I was like, how can I call this, right? And have I talked about this element before? I feel that
with the guy, the tough guy.
Yeah.
The one of the guys in LA, I think, or you know, one of the gang members that your gaze transformed his heart.
Maybe yes, but the example that I wanna give to explain this term that I had to invent is like the killing with kindness gaze. Well, yeah, of course, like all the stories that I've shared with you about the gangsters that I work with in DC. Now I am good friends. The last time that I went, it was like in March, I think, or in Holy Week, and now people know me, right? Not me, but Mission Youth. Like they also know me, but I mean Mission Youth. But I was there, and then I'm greeting this guy that I have seen before, and I'm like, hey, I don't even remember his name, Mickey, I think, Mickey. I don't remember. I should remember. But anyway, he looks at me and he's like, oh, you are the famous Carla. I'm like, am I famous? I didn't know that. Is that good or bad? And it's like, oh no, I mean, many people here have your back. So people won't mess up with you. I'm like, wow, that is so cool. You know, like these gangsters, now they are protecting us. And this is because we kill that mask that they put, you know, like I'm tough. And we kill that mask with our kindness and with our eyes that irradiate. How can I discover that goodness that hides within you? And it's very, very hidden. But I refuse to believe that you're that tough, bad guy that you pretend to be. I refuse to believe it. So I'm gonna just like kill that mask with my kindness, right? And I don't know if I told you this other example, something that happened to me in Colombia. Well, you know how we consecrate women, we try to be modest and, you know, yes, pretty as much as we can, but modest, right? And so I went to the market to buy like some groceries and stuff. You know, there's markets in the streets and just like, so I was walking there with my bags and I had a dress similar to these, maybe whatever, maybe more casual. And then in Mexico, in Latin America, it's very common, unfortunately, that men, you walk in the street and they just tell you all these comments, right? They comment about your body and your shape, no matter how modest you are, they will, even if you're like this fat, ugly woman, doesn't matter, they will still tell you, oh, you know, like sometimes more vulgar than others. So then these guys started telling me these vulgar things. And I was just like, you know, you just ignore and you continue. But then in that moment, did I tell you this example? So in that moment, I just thought, let's see what happens. And so he was there, I passed by, and then I just turned around after he finished doing these comments, and I just looked into his eyes. He was sitting down. I'm like, hello, mister, how are you doing? My name is Carla and I'm a religious nun. Is there anything that you want me to pray for? And he just takes like first he was like, you're so beautiful, and then in his eyes, he was shocked, like he was confused, and I could see there was this transition, right? Like before he was this guy, like, you know, I like your body and things like that, and then he's shocked, and then in that transition, all of a sudden, this good guy emerged, right? And this, like a little kid, like, oh, sister, good morning, and he was ashamed, and he was like, shoot, right? Like he didn't say I'm sorry. He was so ashamed. Like I guess he was so ashamed of even asking for forgiveness, right? And so he was like, sister, yes, thank you so much. Please pray for my wife because she's in the hospital. And then he starts telling me all these stories, and I'm like, these are two different persons, you know? Yeah. Two different persons. One that pretends to be this vulgar guy that is only seeing a sexual object, and then all of a sudden, with an act of kindness, you bring out the best of this person, and he opens his heart and he becomes vulnerable. And when before he was a person that would make me feel afraid and unsafe, now it's a person that I want to embrace and welcome into my heart. And I keep praying for him. Of course, I don't know, it's not that I gave him my phone number, right? Not that level of kindness, but we also have to be prudent. But then, yeah, it's just like these examples of daily things that can happen and daily miracles that could happen if we dare to refuse that this person is what he is pretending to be. I refuse to believe that you are that jerk that I'm saying. You know, I refuse to think that you are that angry man that I'm seeing now that is just yelling at me. I refuse. And I am intrigued, and I want to discover that goodness that is so buried within you. I want to unleash it. I want to do something to make that person come out, right? Because we are all sons and daughters of God, and with our eyes we can just like dig deeper, so that we help that person to come out, you know. So that is something very beautiful that I decided to call this way: killing with kindness, the killing with kindness gaze. Okay, so then this is a quote that I took from Tony Robbins. I think I've mentioned him. I like his speeches, even though he uses a lot of bad words, but he says cool things that motivate. So one thing that he says is that confusion is the perfect state for learning and growth. And I totally saw in that guy his confusion, right? Because what happens, men, like we as human persons, we are also kind of trained, like sometimes when you tame a dog, for example, it's like you give a stimuli and then they respond this way. And you give this, you know, and then there's this reaction. And it's like automatic. So maybe this guy, he was used, oh, I will say this vulgar thing, and this lady will just look at me like, oh, or she will say a bad word, or she will just ignore me, and that's what his brain is expecting to happen, that will happen. But then what happens in his brain when he sees this like super random, out of the blue, totally disconnected reaction, then we create that confusion. It's even like in the neuroscience. This statement has a lot of backup in the new neuroscience, right? That has been developed in the last century. So when you create that confusion with your reactions that are so opposite to the action that was inflicted, then that confusion opens the neurons of the person for a new learning, for something new that is to come. You know, it makes our brain more receptive to learn, and then also our spirit. It's not only something neurological, it's also something spiritual. All of a sudden, my spirit is like receptive to be maybe edified or to be evangelized, right? So this is something that we can create if we create that confusion in people that don't expect to be loved because they know they are acting in a way that is not lovable. But if my reaction is loving, that creates that confusion. Okay. And then, well, we're gonna talk a little bit about how my humanizing gaze can bring the person back to who they truly are, right? I mean, this example, I just love it because it's so eloquent. And then look, how can we do that? So I just thought that it would be good to word it this way because our gaze has to be a gaze that is emotionally detached, but at the same time, emotionally intrigued and absorbed. So what does this mean? And when I was preparing this talk, I was thinking of Mary Magdalene, right? In the resurrection, we know how she went into the sepulcher and the sepulcher is empty and she's crying and she asks who she thinks it's the gardener, where did you take him, right? And he just calls her Mary. And then Rabboni, right? And she just goes and clings to Jesus. And Jesus is telling her, let me go, don't cling to me. And what is happening here is this effect where there is all these emotions that are going on, and Mary Magdalene is feeling this emotionally. She's intrigued, she's fascinated because she just discovered the beauty of the rabbi, of this man that is there, and that he has defeated death. And she is like intrigued and she's absorbed by the inner beauty that is trying to hide from our sight. In that case, Jesus was revealing himself, right? So he was not hiding. But whenever we encounter someone that doesn't seem to be very lovable, that should be our attitude of being emotionally intrigued. Like, what am I gonna do? And how am I called to look at this person so that I actually discover or unveil this inner beauty that is hiding in this person? And that as I am doing that, at the same time, I am emotionally detached from these bias that are telling me, oh, here he comes again with his speech where I already know how stubborn he is, and I already know how we tend to define people as how we see they usually react. And this, I imagine, I'm sure it happens to you all the time with your husbands, right? You already know his defects. And yeah, maybe you say, well, he doesn't listen. He just likes to talk and talk and talk, and he then just doesn't listen to me, right? So then when you're having a conversation and he interrupts you, then maybe you just roll your eyes because you're like, yeah, here we go again. Then he's gonna start with his speech, and that is a bias. That is a bias because you are taking for granted that he will do the same. And maybe he will, but your eyes and your rolling your eyes is actually promoting that he does that, right? I think we have talked about this in the other sessions, how with my rolling of eyes or my face of, yeah, I know, you know what, don't even tell me, I know what you think. Well, that is actually telling him, you are this person that I have a hard time to deal with. And how can that even motivate him to be a better person, right? So we have to be emotionally detached from those appearances or from those prejudice that we might have sometimes, right? And be open and always expect the best from people and transmit that with our eyes, because I can tell you that can actually change the attitude of the other person. I am sure it has it happened to you that you feel that you are acting in a way that is not loving, and all of a sudden the invincible patience of someone else makes you realize, oh, I'm being such a mean person, like I should just relax. Has it happened to you? Or does it only happen to me? Because I'm surrounded by many beautiful consecrated women. Not all of them all the time are as virtuous, right? Like we all have our mistakes, but it has happened to me a lot that I'm like, leave me alone, and then they're like, okay, yes, don't worry, I'll leave you alone. I'm like, no, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to say that. You know, like, because they are so good, that just it's a call to my conscience. It's like, wow, yeah, I'm being the mean one. Like, she doesn't need to leave me alone. I need to change my attitude. So that is something very beautiful that we can foster with our gaze. And then, well, a gaze, here is where I wanted to focus. We still have some time. A gaze empowered by your own vulnerability. And we know when we talk about this femininity, something that englobes all these four aspects of that feminine genius, and that actually permeates each of those four elements, is the vulnerability, right? We as women, we are vulnerable. And that can sound as a weakness. But in reality, right now, we're gonna dive into this topic of vulnerability, and we will actually see the beauty of vulnerability, the power and the strength, the source of strength that it can be in our lives, right? So I'm gonna go over like 6 elements or six principles of vulnerability, okay? So the first one is that vulnerability is the source of authentic courage because it implies humility. And this is something that I also, I don't remember at what point in my consecrated life I learned it. The source of authentic courage is humility, right? And that humility sometimes requires vulnerability. Why are we saying this? Because I remember when I worked in a boarding school, before living in DC, I worked for 6 years in a boarding school. And I remember I would give like spiritual direction and dialogues to all these teenage girls, right? And I remember there was this one girl that was so shy. Like I barely heard her voice maybe 3 times in the year. She would not talk, and she would never participate in the classes, and she would just stay all the time very, very quiet. But then it was funny. She would arrive to spiritual direction, and instead of asking for advice, she would tell me, Carla, I think that this girl needs to do this and this and that, and then this other girl needs to do this and this. So as if she was like the wise girl. And I was like, this girl, why is she so extroverted here and so like prideful, I would say, but outside, why is she so shy? And then I realized, and she started realizing, that her shyness was actually because she was so full of pride. And she recognized it. It was very beautiful when in that process, because she said, Carla, Miss Carla, they would call us Miss, right? Miss Carla. She would be like, I am so prideful that I don't want to speak in the classroom because of the fear of making a mistake and everybody laughing at me. So that's why I prefer to stay backstage. And I prefer not to participate, even if I'm totally sure that I know the answer. What if I say it in a way that it's not gonna be cool, or I prefer to just stay, silent. And that is why I don't participate, because of my pride. And then, so then she started working on her humility, and she started participating more. And sometimes we make this mistake where we think being humble means to be quiet and to be always left the last place, and not actually, to be real humble, like really, really humble, it implies to go out and to say, even if I mess it up, I feel in my heart that if I give my opinion, I will enrich the conversation, right? And that's my intention after all, to enrich the others, to help them, to serve them. So I will take courage, I will raise my hand, and I will give my opinion, even taking the risk that everybody will end up laughing at me because maybe what I'm gonna say is very stupid or silly or it doesn't make any sense. I will have that courage because I want to serve others. You see? So when you see yourself as a gift for other people because you are aware of how you have been looked at by God, then you take that courage and you become more free. And you will care less on what people will think of you, because it doesn't matter. God loves me, right? Even if they think horrible things about me, God loves me, and that's all I need. And that's the real source of confidence and the real source of humility that can bring us to that balance, where we don't want to take over because I want to be the star and I want to be the one calling and drawing all the attention to me. No. What I want is to serve, not to be the center of attention. And because I want to serve is that I can go out and give my opinion and be myself, right? Allow my person to come out and just be that gift that I am meant to be for other people. Then the second principle of vulnerability is that it is a unique force. Now, I forgot to write here like a note. I always forget the names, but there was this president here in the US, Richard Nixon, that I don't know if you know, there was this guy that I can't remember. I was trying to remember as I was driving from DC now in the morning. What was his name? The guy that wanted to kill him, Richard Nixon. I think he's still alive and he's in jail. I might be mistaken, but this, like, I mean, it was Richard. What?
Is it Sing Sing?
No. I have it in some notes, but I just don't want to take out the presentation. But anyway, there was this guy that wanted to kill Richard Nixon, and he had planned the murder for 5 years. He's like, yeah, like now that he's gonna be there, like he was just like figuring out how to kill him, right? And then finally there was this event where he actually came out. It was like a parade and everything, and he had a gun with him. And then he was like about to pass by. Imagine, like, he had been fostering this dream, this thought, this idea, this strategy for 5 years. And when he was about to pull the gun, but with his shoulder, accidentally he pushed a very old lady that was there behind him. So then when he saw that, and the lady just grabbed him from his shoulder, and he just looked at him like little, and she's like, "Are you okay, sir?" And then because of that vulnerability, he said, "I can't kill this man because I don't want this beautiful lady to see this." It was out of because she was so vulnerable and so fragile, he quit that mission that he had. Imagine, and he had the gun in his hand. It's in Google. I'm gonna see the.
Is it Arthur Brammer?
Yes. Yes, I think that's the one. Yeah. yes, that's the name. Yeah, good job. So it was amazing, and there you can see like the power that we have in our vulnerability. And it is actually a power that if we were these malicious women, we could use to manipulate, right? Because then if I come to my husband and I just cry and I do all this drama to get what I want, well, that can be a power, but it's very bad used, right? But when we use our vulnerability to actually, I am becoming vulnerable with you, and I want you to see that this is hurting me, or that I am afraid, or that I would feel more safe if we had this conversation, or if you, whatever, right? That disarms the heart of whoever you're talking to. It's a disarming force, and it empowers you. So our vulnerability is this well of richness, right? Because of our sensitivity, we can empathize. Is that how you say it? Yeah. More with people. It's a source of power. It's a source of energy and force, right? That sometimes men, they don't have it. Then the third principle is this, what actually Pope Francis, I've heard it a lot from him. He talks about the revolution of tenderness. In the Apostolic Exhortation Evangelii Gaudium, it's the very first apostolic exhortation that he wrote. He talks a lot about this. And he says that tenderness has a revolutionary force. Because nowadays, we, like in the world, we want to impose principles, right? And there's all this agenda for the LGBT and all this, but it's imposed. It's like, you have to believe, if not, you are homophobic, and if you don't believe what I believe, then you have to go to jail, and you have to, but he says, what if we used tenderness in our conversations with those people that think so differently than we think? What if we use the power of tenderness? I'm sure the church would have way less enemies than if we want to just impose, right? No, this is the truth, and if not, you're all gonna go to hell and burn in fire. Well, is that actually transforming a heart? That might transform the actions of someone, right? But the actions, when you imagine God that comes to you with this courage and thunders and like all his power to use it against you if you dare to violate one of his commandments. Well, I'm sure you would execute any action to avoid that punishment, right? So he would conquer your actions through that violence, but he would not conquer your heart. So even if he tells you, you have to love me, well, you can pretend that you love by doing actions that show as if you were in love. but you can't actually love. You can only conquer the heart of people through tenderness. And that is why God became so tender and so humble and so vulnerable. That's why he became this little baby. I keep thinking of that. Like when he was born, he was so vulnerable, right? Like Mary literally could have taken baby Jesus and throw him through a cliff. And it's like, she had the power to kill God that way because he became so vulnerable. But it's through tenderness that he conquered our heart also. Not only our actions of, yes, we have to go to mass, yes, we have to be good people and forgive and all these beautiful virtues, but we want to, because our heart has been conquered by the tenderness and the beauty of Jesus. You see? So tenderness is the virtue that can allow us to be true conquerors, not only of the actions that we want people to execute, but also of the hearts, so that people are actually aligned. We can bring people to that alignment, and that is something very beautiful. Then the fourth principle of vulnerability is seeing events from the perspective of eternity, right? When you become vulnerable and when you realize how fragile we are and how little our life is, right? How long we can live, let's say 80 years, 90 years, maybe 100 years. Still, that is just a little spot in eternity, right? And when we realize I am so little, I am like no one, right? Why do I care so much? I remember when I was in high school, I was very, I would always want to get the best grades in math just because that helped my pride to feel like, oh, I'm so smart, right? And I remember one time I got, instead of an A+, it was an A. And I was so upset. I was so upset and so mad, and I was crying. And this teacher that I had, he passed away recently, but he was a very Catholic man, and he was a really good teacher also. And when he saw me crying because I got an A instead of an A+, like it was not a D, it was an A, it was a really good grade. And he's like, Carla, will this actually matter when you are in your bed before dying? I'm like, and I got mad and I left. But I'm like, that's so true. Like, why do I care so much, you know? Why do we give so much importance to so many little tiny things that will actually not make a difference when I am dying on that bed? It will not make a difference. So when you are aware of that fragility of humanity, of my person, of my story, then you put things in a better and wiser perspective, right? And that enables you to see things in a more like chill way, you know? You're not gonna get scandalized with this sin that somebody did or something that they did to you. She's just learning to be a human person. Can I just give her another chance, right? Can I just be more tolerant, just a little bit, you know? Can we just have that big perspective of how small we are in this, like, you know, in the realm of eternity? It's nothing. What I am enduring now, it's nothing. And then, well, the fifth principle is the disarming power of tears. I've also heard this so many times from Pope Francis, and he has talked about this repeatedly, right? And I remember, I think it was in 2017, in January 2017 or 16, I might be mistaken with the year, he went to the Philippines. Maybe it was the 15th, I don't remember which year, but you can download the speech that he gave in that mass where he was speaking to the youth. And then they started interviewing him, and it seems like there was this woman, because you know in the Philippines there's this level of poverty that we cannot even imagine. It's like really, really bad. And so a woman came to him, and with tears in her eyes, she asked him, "Dear Pope Francis, why do kids have to suffer? Like, I understand that I suffer, it's okay, I'm gonna bear with it. But why do kids in our world have to suffer what I see they suffer here? I see them dying of hunger in the streets. I see them being like taken for all these businesses and all these horrible things. Why?" And she was crying. And the beautiful answer that Pope gave, you can read it because it's more beautiful than how I will explain it, but he said, I think that the answer, there's no answer, but if we dare to learn how to cry, only then we will understand and we will be able to give an answer in our hearts to that existential question. And he says we don't know how to cry because we cry only when we are sad, when I don't get what I want, when I am not the center of attention, when I am not pleased, and so we don't know how to cry for others.